I'm not who you wrote to, she whispered, and Caleb Danner's world shattered like glass beneath a hammer. 6 months of letters, 6 months of hope, all built on a foundation of ashes. The woman standing before him at Cedar Bluff Station wore Margaret's dress, carried Margaret's trunk, but spoke words that stopped his heart cold. One sentence. That's all it took to destroy everything he'd believed in. But what came next would teach him that some truths are worth more than the lies we tell ourselves to survive. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of heartbreak and hope can travel across this lonely world. The Texas sun had a way of making everything look eternal, the way it stretched across the plains like molten copper, turning the dust into something almost holy. Caleb Danner had watched that same sun rise and set over his 40 acres for 3 years now, and until 6 months ago, he'd done it alone. The land didn't care if a man was lonely. It just asked for work, for sweat, for the kind of silence that could drive a person half mad if they let it. But then came the letters. The first one had arrived on a Tuesday in March, delivered by old Jim Hendricks, who ran the mail route between Cedar Bluff and Abilene. Caleb had been mending fence posts when he saw the dust cloud approaching, and something in his chest had tightened even before Jim handed him the envelope. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, not the kind of thing that usually found its way to a homesteader's calloused hands. "Mr. Danner," it began, in handwriting so elegant it looked like lace. "My name is Margaret Hale, and I am writing to you at the suggestion of Reverend Thomas, who spoke highly of your character and your prospects. I am a woman of modest means but considerable education, seeking a new beginning in the West. If you would be amenable to a correspondence, I would be most grateful for your reply." Caleb had read that letter 17 times the first day. He'd held it up to the lamplight that night, studying the loops and curves of each letter as if they might reveal something more than words. There was something in the way she wrote, a careful dignity, yes, but also a warmth that seemed to seep through the ink itself. He'd written back that same evening, his own penmanship crude compared to hers. He'd told her about the land, about the creek that ran silver in the moonlight, about the way the wind sounded different depending on which direction it came from. He told her things he'd never said to another living soul, because somehow, writing to a stranger 200 miles away felt safer than speaking truth aloud. Her second letter came 3 weeks later, and it was longer. She wrote about books. She'd read Dickens and Austen, could quote Shakespeare from memory. She wrote about music, about how she missed the sound of a piano, about how silence could be both a comfort and a curse. She wrote about loneliness in a way that made Caleb's throat tight, because she understood it the way only someone who'd lived it could. "Sometimes," she'd written, "I think the hardest part isn't being alone. It's knowing that somewhere, someone else is alone too, and you're both just waiting for the courage to bridge the distance." That's what they'd been doing for 6 months, building a bridge made of paper and ink, spanning the miles between Cedar Bluff and Abilene, one careful word at a time. Caleb had told her about his past, about the war that had taken his youth and left him with scars that didn't always show. She'd told him about her own losses, about a family that had slipped away like water through fingers, about dreams that had withered on the vine. And slowly, letter by letter, something had grown between them, something that felt like hope. Caleb hadn't planned on loving her. He'd certainly never expected her to love him back. But somewhere between her description of spring rain and his account of breaking a wild Mustang, something had shifted. The letters had started arriving weekly instead of monthly. The words had grown warmer, more intimate, more real. "I find myself thinking of you at odd hours," she'd written in July. "When I wake before dawn, or when I'm walking home from the mercantile, I imagine what it would be like to see the things you describe, to stand beside you and watch that Texas sky turn purple at sunset, to hear your voice instead of just reading your words." That letter had been the one that decided him. He'd written back immediately, his hand trembling so badly he'd ruined 3 sheets of paper before getting it right. "Margaret," he'd written, "if you're willing, I'd like you to come to Cedar Bluff. Not as a stranger, and not just as a correspondent. Come as someone who might want to build a life here. With me." 3 weeks of silence had followed. 3 weeks that had felt like 3 years. Caleb had worked himself nearly to exhaustion during that time, trying not to think about all the reasons she might say no. Too forward, too presumptuous, too much hope placed in words on paper. But then her reply had come, and it was just one word long. Yes. That single word had set everything in motion. Arrangements were made. Reverend Thomas, who knew people in Abilene, helped coordinate the details. Margaret would take the stage from Abilene to Cedar Bluff, a 2-day journey across territory that was still wild enough to make a man nervous sending a woman through it alone. But she'd insisted she was capable. "I've come this far already," she'd written. "What's a few more miles?" The last letter had arrived a week ago, confirming her arrival date, September 15th, on the afternoon stage. Caleb had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. "I'm nervous," she'd admitted in that final letter. "Nervous that I won't be what you imagined. Nervous that the woman in the letters won't match the woman who steps off that coach. But I'm also hopeful. More hopeful than I've been in years. See you soon, Caleb. I can hardly wait." He'd cleaned the cabin 3 times that week, scrubbed floors that were already clean, washed windows that already gleamed. He'd ridden into town and spent money he couldn't really spare on new curtains, on fresh linens, on a bouquet of wildflowers that he'd arranged in a mason jar on the table. He'd even convinced himself to get a haircut from Mrs. Patterson, who'd given him a knowing smile and asked if there was someone special he was trying to impress. "Maybe," he'd admitted, feeling heat crawl up his neck. "About time," she'd said, her scissors flashing in the light. 3 years is too long for a good man to spend alone. Now, standing outside Cedar Bluff Station with his hat pressed to his chest, Caleb felt like that good man was about to get everything he'd ever wanted. The stage was late, nearly an hour past when it should have arrived, but he didn't mind. Some things were worth waiting for. The sun was touching the horizon when he finally heard it, the distant rumble of wheels, the sharp crack of the driver's whip, the jingle of harness bells. Caleb's heart kicked against his ribs like a trapped bird. He straightened his shoulders, ran a hand through his freshly cut hair, and tried to remember how to breathe. The stagecoach materialized out of the dust like something from a dream, its 4 horses lathered and blowing hard. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete Carson, who'd been running this route for 20 years, pulled the team to a halt with practiced ease. "Whoa there, easy now," Pete called, setting the brake. He looked down at Caleb with an expression that seemed almost sympathetic. "Got your passenger, Danner. She's had a rough trip, though. Might want to take it gentle." Caleb barely heard him. His entire focus was on the coach door as Pete climbed down and opened it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a hand appeared, small, trembling, gripping the doorframe. And then she stepped out. The first thing Caleb noticed was that she was younger than he'd expected. Margaret had never given her exact age, but her letters had carried the weight of experience, of years lived fully. This woman couldn't have been more than 25, her face still holding on to the last remnants of girlhood, despite the exhaustion that shadowed her eyes. She wore a traveling dress of dark blue wool, dusty from the road and wrinkled from 2 days of sitting. Her hair was brown, pulled back in a simple bun, with loose tendrils curling around her face. She clutched a small trunk with both hands, holding it against her chest like a shield. When she looked up and met Caleb's eyes, he saw fear there. Not the nervous excitement he'd expected, just pure, raw fear. "Miss Hale?" he asked, his voice rougher than he'd intended. He took a step forward, offering what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Margaret?" The woman's face crumpled. For a heartbeat, Caleb thought she might cry. Then she straightened, set down the trunk, and spoke words that would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. "I'm not who you wrote to." The world seemed to stop. The wind died. The last rays of sunlight froze in the sky. Even the horses stood perfectly still, as if they too were waiting to understand what those 6 words meant. "What?" Caleb heard himself say, but the word came out distant, like it belonged to someone else. The woman's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My name is Anna. Anna Hale. Margaret was my sister." Was. That single word, past tense, final, as a coffin lid closing, made something inside Caleb's chest crack like river ice in spring. "I don't," he started, but the words scattered like leaves in wind. He couldn't seem to form a complete thought. "The letters," She wrote them, Anna said quickly, desperately, as if speed might somehow soften the blow. At least, the first one she did. She wanted to come here, wanted to start over. She talked about you constantly, about your letters, about the things you'd written. But then she got sick, and Anna's voice broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting for composure. Pete Carson, still standing by the coach, shifted uncomfortably and muttered something about checking the horses. Caleb felt like he was drowning in air. Sick, he repeated numbly. What happened? Pneumonia. Anna's eyes glistened with unshed tears. It started in January, right after the new year. The doctor said her lungs were already weak from before, from scarlet fever when she was a child. The pneumonia it was too much. January. Caleb's mind raced backward through the letters. January was when they'd started arriving more frequently, when Margaret's handwriting had seemed to flow even more beautifully across the page, when she'd written about hope and new beginnings and the future they might build together. But the letters kept coming, he said, his voice hollow. All the way through summer. I got one just last week. Anna's face crumpled again, and this time a tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. She made me promise, she whispered. Before she died, she made me promise I'd keep writing to you. She dictated them to me when she was too weak to hold a pen. She'd tell me what to say, and I'd write it in her hand. I'd practiced for weeks until I could copy her writing perfectly. She said you deserve to have something beautiful to hope for, even if she couldn't be there to give it to you. The words hit Caleb like physical blows. Each one landed with the weight of truth, reshaping everything he'd believed for the past 8 months. Those letters, the ones he'd treasured, the ones that had pulled him through lonely nights and given him a reason to believe in tomorrow, had been written by a dying woman and her sister. A beautiful, terrible conspiracy of love and grief. She died in March, Anna continued, her voice steadier now, as if saying it aloud was helping her find solid ground. March 17th, at 3 a.m, I was holding her hand. Her last words were about you. She said, "Tell Caleb I'm sorry. Tell him he deserves someone who'll stay." Caleb's knees felt weak. He took a stumbling step backward and found himself leaning against the station's hitching post. The wood was rough under his palms, real and solid in a world that had suddenly become nothing but smoke and mirrors. Why? He managed to ask. Why keep writing if she was gone? Why let me believe? Because she asked me to, Anna said, and now her voice carried an edge of defiance, of fierce loyalty to a dead woman's wishes. Because she loved you, even though she'd never met you. Because your letters were the only thing that made her smile in those last weeks. She'd make me read them to her over and over. She'd close her eyes and imagine being there, seeing all the things you described. It made the pain bearable. She reached into her bag with trembling hands and pulled out an envelope. It was different from the others, sealed with red wax, heavier. She wrote this herself, Anna said, holding it out to Caleb, before she got too weak. She made me promise I'd give it to you in person, to explain everything, to tell you the truth. Caleb stared at the envelope like it might bite him. His hands wouldn't move to take it, couldn't, because accepting it would make this real, would transform the beautiful dream he'd been living into something else entirely, something painful and true and unbearably sad. I should have told you sooner, Anna said when he didn't take the letter. I should have written after she died, should have told you the truth, but I'd made a promise, and I thought maybe it wouldn't hurt as much if you got to hope a little longer. That was selfish of me. I'm sorry. She set the letter down on top of her trunk, then wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The gesture was so simple, so human, that it cut through Caleb's shock like a knife. I'll get the next stage out, Anna said quietly. Pete can help me find a place to stay tonight, and I'll leave in the morning. I needed to keep my promise to her, to bring you that letter, to tell you how sorry she was. She turned toward the coach, reaching for her trunk, and something in Caleb finally broke free. He lunged forward, his hand closing around her wrist. Not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her. Wait, he said hoarsely. Just wait. Anna froze, looking at him with those frightened eyes. Up close, Caleb could see that they were hazel, lighter than he'd imagined Margaret's might be, flecked with gold in the dying sunlight. You came all this way, he said, his mind still struggling to process everything. 2 days on a stage alone to deliver a letter from a dead woman to a stranger. Why would you do that? Anna's laugh was bitter, broken. Because she was my sister. Because I loved her. Because I'm the reason she's dead. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge, like a confession, like a wound laid bare. What do you mean? Caleb asked, his grip on her wrist loosening but not releasing. Anna's face twisted with pain. The night she got sick, I was supposed to be watching her. She'd been feeling poorly for days, but I went out anyway, went to a dance in town because I was young and stupid and sick of playing nursemaid. When I came home, I found her outside, collapsed in the snow. She'd gone looking for me, worried something had happened. If I'd been there, if I'd stayed like I should have— Stop, Caleb said, the word sharp enough to cut through her self-recrimination. That's not how it works. Sickness doesn't care about should-haves and might-have-beens. Maybe not, Anna whispered, but guilt does. She pulled her wrist free from his grasp, but she didn't turn away. Instead, she looked at him with something that might have been curiosity beneath the grief. She said you were kind, Anna told him. In her letters to me, the real ones, the ones just between sisters, she said you wrote about the world like it was still worth seeing, like there was still beauty in it, even after everything you'd been through. She said that's what she loved most about you. Not your land or your prospects or any of the practical things, just the way you could find something worth describing in an ordinary sunset. Caleb's throat was too tight to speak. He bent down and picked up the letter Anna had left on the trunk, feeling the weight of it in his hands. Margaret's final words, written when she knew death was coming for her. Pete Carson cleared his throat from somewhere near the horses. Sorry to interrupt, he said gruffly, but I need to get these animals settled for the night. Station master's expecting me. Miss Anna, I can help you find a room at the boarding house if you're ready. Anna nodded, reaching for her trunk again, but Caleb stopped her with a shake of his head. No, he said, his voice rough as gravel. You're not staying at a boarding house. Anna's eyes widened. Mr. Danner, I couldn't possibly— You came all this way to keep a promise, Caleb interrupted. Least I can do is offer you a proper roof for the night. My cabin's got a spare room. It's not much, but it's clean and it's quiet. You can rest there. And in the morning, if you still want to take that stage, I'll drive you to the station myself. That's not appropriate, Anna protested, but her voice lacked conviction. She looked exhausted, Caleb realized. Bone-deep tired in a way that went beyond the physical. Appropriate went out the window the moment you stepped off that coach, Caleb said. He picked up her trunk. It was surprisingly light, and nodded toward his horse. Come on, it's about a half-hour ride to my place. We can talk there, or we can sit in silence, but either way, you're not spending tonight in some dusty boarding house room when you've traveled 200 miles to bring me the truth. Anna studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to see past the shock and hurt to whatever lay beneath. Finally, she nodded. All right, she said quietly. Thank you. Pete helped Anna climb onto Caleb's horse, a sturdy bay mare named Molly, while Caleb secured the trunk and swung up behind her. The intimacy of it struck him immediately. Anna's back pressed against his chest, her hair smelling of dust and lavender, the careful way she held herself away from him even as the horse's gait forced them together. They rode in silence as the sun finally surrendered to the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Caleb was achingly aware of every breath Anna took, every small shift of her weight, every moment that reminded him she was real and Margaret was not. The cabin appeared as the last light faded, a small structure of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and windows that glowed yellow from the lamps Caleb had left burning. He'd built it himself, 3 years of labor poured into 4 walls and a roof. It had always seemed adequate before, even comfortable, but seeing it now, through a stranger's eyes, through Anna's eyes, he felt suddenly ashamed of its simplicity. He helped Anna down from the horse, his hands at her waist, and felt her tremble beneath his touch. From cold or exhaustion or something else, he couldn't tell. Come inside, he said, leading Molly toward the small barn. I'll get the horse settled and bring in your trunk. There's coffee on the stove if you want some. Anna nodded and walked toward the cabin, her steps hesitant, as if entering it might somehow make everything more real. Caleb watched her disappear through the door before turning to Molly with a heavy sigh. Well, girl, he muttered as he removed the saddle. This wasn't how I thought today would go. Molly whickered softly, as if in agreement. Inside the cabin, Anna stood in the center of the main room, her arms wrapped around herself. The space was just as Caleb had described in his letters. There was the stone fireplace he'd built with his own hands, the table he'd carved from oak, the rocking chair in the corner where he sat on winter evenings. The wildflowers he'd picked were still in their mason jar on the table, their petals just beginning to wilt. She walked over to them slowly, running her fingers along the rim of the jar. She would have loved these, Anna whispered to the empty room. She always loved wildflowers, said they were proof that beauty didn't need permission to exist. Caleb entered a moment later, carrying her trunk. He set it down near the door to the spare room, then moved to the stove where the coffee pot sat. "It's strong," he warned as he poured 2 cups. "I make it for work, not for pleasure." "Strong is good," Anna said, accepting the cup with hands that still trembled slightly. "Thank you." They stood there in awkward silence, 2 strangers bound together by a dead woman's letters and the weight of truths that had to be spoken. Finally, Caleb gestured toward the table. "Sit," he said. "Please. You must be exhausted." Anna sank into one of the chairs with visible relief. Caleb sat across from her, the letter still clutched in his hand. He hadn't opened it yet. Wasn't sure he could. "Tell me about her," he said instead. "The real Margaret. Not the one in the letters, the real person." Anna's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the request. Then they softened, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "She was stubborn," Anna began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as proud. Our parents died when I was 12 and she was 18. She raised me herself, worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. She never complained, never asked for help, never let me see how hard it was for her." Anna took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitterness, but drinking it anyway. "She loved to read," she continued. "Our mother had a small collection of books. Nothing valuable, just novels and poetry. And Margaret treated them like treasures. She'd read passages aloud to me at night, doing all the voices, making the stories come alive. She could quote whole chapters from memory." Caleb felt his chest tighten. "She wrote to me about books," he said quietly. "Said they were windows into other lives." "That's exactly how she thought of them," Anna said, her smile growing a fraction warmer. "She said books were proof that we weren't alone, that someone else had felt what we felt, thought what we thought. She said the right story could save a person, if they let it." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the lamplight flicker. "She wanted to be a teacher," Anna said suddenly. "Did she tell you that? Before our parents died, she'd been saving money for normal school. She wanted to teach children to love words the way she did, but then they died, and there was me to raise, and the dream just faded." "She never mentioned it," Caleb said, feeling the loss of that unknown dream like a physical ache. "She wrote about books and music and beauty, but never about what she wanted for herself." "That was Margaret," Anna said, her voice thick with emotion. "Always thinking about everyone else, never herself. Even at the end, even when she was dying, she was worried about you, about what would happen to you when you found out she was gone. She made me promise to keep writing because she couldn't bear the thought of you losing hope." Caleb looked down at the letter in his hands. The red wax seal gleamed in the lamplight, still unbroken. "I should read this," he said, but he didn't move to open it. "You don't have to," Anna said gently. "Not tonight. Not if you're not ready." But Caleb was already breaking the seal, his fingers moving before his mind could tell them to stop. The wax crumbled away, and he unfolded the paper. Margaret's handwriting, the real thing this time, not Anna's careful copy, sprawled across the page in loops that were shakier than in the other letters, evidence of illness and weakness. "My dear Caleb," it began. Caleb's vision blurred, and he had to blink several times before he could continue reading. "If you're reading this, then Anna has kept her promise, and you know the truth. I'm sorry for the deception, sorry for the pain it will cause you. I wish I could say I wouldn't do it again, but I'd be lying. Those months of writing to you, of imagining a life I'd never have, were the happiest I'd known in years. You gave me something to hope for, when hope was all I had left. I need you to understand something, Caleb. Everything I wrote to you is true, not factually perhaps, The woman in those letters could walk and dance and stand beside you under that Texas sky. But emotionally, spiritually, in every way that mattered, that woman was me. Those were my thoughts, my dreams, my heart on those pages. The only lie was that I'd live long enough to give them to you in person. I'm not afraid of dying. I've made my peace with it. But I'm afraid of leaving you with nothing but regrets and what-ifs. So I'm asking you something now, even though I have no right to ask anything of you. I'm asking you not to close yourself off because of this. Don't let my death be the thing that convinces you love is foolish or hope is dangerous. You deserve more than that. You deserve everything I couldn't give you. Anna will bring you this letter. She's carrying a burden of guilt that doesn't belong to her, and I suspect she'll try to shoulder your pain too if you let her. Don't let her. She's stronger than she knows, but she's also been alone for so long. Just like you, just like I was. Maybe that's worth something. Maybe two lonely people could be less lonely together. I'm not asking you to love her. I'm not asking you to forget me or what we shared through ink and paper. I'm just asking you to stay open to whatever comes next. To keep seeing beauty in ordinary sunsets. To keep finding words for the things that matter. To keep being the man whose letters made me believe the world was still worth living in. Thank you, Caleb, for the dream. Even if it was only that, it was enough. With all my heart, Margaret. Caleb finished reading and carefully folded the letter, his hands surprisingly steady. When he looked up, Anna was watching him with an expression that was part sympathy, part fear, as if she expected him to rage or weep or throw her out into the night. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the darkness that had swallowed the plains. Behind him, he heard Anna's chair scrape against the floor. I should let you rest, she said quietly. I've caused you enough pain for one day. You didn't cause anything, Caleb said without turning around. You were just the messenger. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, he agreed. It doesn't. Anna moved toward the spare room, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. She paused in the doorway, and Caleb could feel her gaze on his back. Mr. Danner, she said hesitantly. Caleb, for what it's worth, I think she was right about you, about the way you see the world. I've only known you a few hours, but I can already tell you're the kind of man worth hoping for. Before he could respond, she slipped into the room and closed the door softly behind her. Caleb stood at the window for a long time after that, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Texas sky. He thought about Margaret, dying in a bed 200 miles away, dictating letters to her sister because she wanted a stranger to have something beautiful to believe in. He thought about Anna, carrying the weight of a promise and a guilt that would probably never leave her. He thought about the bridge of paper and ink that had spanned the distance between loneliness and hope, only to collapse at the moment he'd tried to cross it. Most of all, he thought about Margaret's final words. Maybe two lonely people could be less lonely together. It wasn't a command or even a request. Just an observation, a possibility left hanging in the air like a question mark. Caleb pulled out his chair and sat down at the table, pushing aside the coffee cups and the wilting wildflowers. He took out a piece of paper and a pen, then paused, staring at the blank page. For 6 months, he'd known exactly what to write. Now, he had no idea where to begin. Finally, slowly, he started to write. To whoever finds this someday. The words formed under his pen, hesitant at first, then gaining strength. Love doesn't die when a heart stops beating. It just changes handwriting. He stopped, read the words, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not healing, that would take time, maybe more time than he had, but a loosening perhaps. A first step toward understanding that the woman who had written those letters wasn't entirely gone because her words still lived in him. Her hope still lived in him. And in the next room, separated by a door and a grief they both carried, Anna lay awake in the darkness, thinking about a sister who had asked too much and given everything, and wondering if keeping promises to the dead was enough to absolve the living of their sins. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust and possibilities not yet written into being. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the night, its voice lonely and beautiful and utterly, perfectly alive. The first chapter of their story had ended with 6 devastating words. But as Caleb set down his pen and Anna finally closed her eyes, neither of them knew that the second chapter was just beginning, written not in the handwriting of the dead, but in the careful, uncertain script of two people learning to hope again, despite everything that should have taught them better. The lamp burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. And in the silence between heartbeats, in the space between grief and mourning, something new began to take shape. Something neither of them had planned for, something neither of them yet understood. But it was there, waiting. Just like the sun would be when it rose again over the Texas plains, turning the dust into gold. Dawn came quietly to the Texas plains, the way it always did, first a softening of the darkness, then a gradual bleeding of gray light across the horizon, and finally the sun itself, burning away the night like a promise kept. Caleb had watched it all from the porch, his body exhausted but his mind too restless for sleep. He'd spent the night in the rocking chair, Margaret's letter folded in his shirt pocket, feeling the weight of it against his chest with every breath. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he lifted the cup to his lips anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. Inside the cabin, everything was silent. Anna hadn't stirred, or if she had, she'd done it quietly enough that the sound hadn't reached him through the walls. He wondered if she'd slept at all, or if she'd spent the night the way he had, caught between memory and reality, trying to make sense of a world that had shifted beneath her feet. The chickens in the yard began their morning chorus, oblivious to human grief. Caleb stood, his joints protesting after a night in the chair, and walked down the porch steps. The morning routine called to him, animals to feed, eggs to collect, 100 small tasks that didn't care whether a man's heart was breaking or whole. There was comfort in that, he supposed. The land demanded presence, not happiness. He was halfway to the chicken coop when he heard the cabin door open behind him. He turned to find Anna standing on the porch, wrapped in a shawl that looked too thin for the morning chill. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the early light, and her face bore the marks of a sleepless night, shadows under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of tears shed in private. "I didn't mean to wake you," Caleb said, his voice rough from disuse. "You didn't," Anna replied. "I was already awake." She hugged the shawl tighter around herself. "I heard you on the porch. Thought maybe you'd... I don't know. Decided you wanted me gone." Caleb shook his head. "I told you, you can stay as long as you need." Anna studied him for a long moment, and he had the distinct impression she was trying to reconcile the man standing before her with the one Margaret had described in her letters. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy something in her, because she nodded and descended the steps. "Let me help," she said. "With the morning work, it's the least I can do." "You don't have to." "I want to," Anna interrupted, her voice firm. "Please, I need to do something useful, something that isn't just sitting with all of this." Caleb understood that better than he wanted to admit. He gestured toward the chicken coop. "All right, you can collect the eggs while I feed the horses. The basket's just inside the door." They worked in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. Caleb found himself watching Anna from the corner of his eye as he hauled feed to the barn. She moved with a careful efficiency around the chickens, speaking softly to them as she gathered eggs, and there was something in the gentle way she handled each one that reminded him of Margaret's letters, that same careful attention to small, beautiful things. When the morning chores were done, they reconvened at the cabin. Anna had found flour and salt in his pantry and was already mixing biscuit dough, her hands working with practiced ease. "Margaret taught me to cook," she said without looking up. "Said every woman should know how to make something out of nothing. We didn't always have much, so she got creative. These biscuits, they were her specialty. Flour, salt, lard, and water. Nothing fancy, but they filled the belly." Caleb watched her work, mesmerized by the rhythm of it. "She wrote about food sometimes," he said. "Described meals like they were poetry. Made hardtack sound like a feast." Anna's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their kneading. That was Margaret. She could find magic in ordinary things, made everything seem worth savoring, even when there wasn't much to savor. The biscuits went into the oven, and Anna busied herself with making fresh coffee while Caleb set the table. It felt strange, this domesticity with a woman he'd met less than 12 hours ago. Strange, but not entirely unwelcome. The cabin had been quiet for so long, 3 years of silence broken only by his own thoughts, that having another person moving through the space felt both foreign and oddly right. They ate breakfast as the sun climbed higher, the biscuits hot and buttery despite their simplicity. Anna ate little, pushing food around her plate more than consuming it, but Caleb found himself hungrier than he'd been in days. The shock was wearing off, he realized, leaving behind a hollow ache that demanded to be filled with something, even if it was just bread and coffee. "Tell me about the last letter," Caleb said abruptly, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Anna. "The one you sent last week. What did Margaret say? What did she want me to know?" Anna set down her fork, her expression pained. She was very weak by then, could barely speak above a whisper, but she was insistent that I write it exactly as she said it. She closed her eyes, as if seeing the scene play out behind her eyelids. She said, "Tell him I'm nervous. Tell him I'm afraid I won't be what he imagined. But tell him I'm hopeful too, more hopeful than I've been in years." Anna's voice cracked. She meant every word. Even knowing she'd never see you, never step off that coach, she still felt it all. The nervousness, the fear, the hope. Caleb's throat tightened. "And the part about hardly being able to wait? That was hers too," Anna whispered. She said it with tears running down her face. She said, "I can hardly wait to see what comes next, even if I won't be there to see it." I didn't understand what she meant then. But now I think she was talking about you, about whatever life you'd build after she was gone. She wanted you to keep going, keep living, even without her. The silence that followed was heavy with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Caleb pushed back from the table and walked to the window, staring out at the land that had been his entire world for 3 years. "I built this place for myself," he said quietly. "After the war, after losing everything, really. I came here because I wanted to start over, wanted to prove I could make something grow in soil that had seen too much blood. For 3 years, it was enough. The work, the silence, the simple fact of survival. It was enough." He turned to face Anna, and she could see the rawness in his expression, the carefully controlled emotion threatening to break free. "Then came the letters," he continued, "and suddenly it wasn't enough anymore. Suddenly there was this possibility of something more. Someone to share the sunsets with, someone to read to on winter nights, someone to make all this solitude make sense, and now she's gone," Anna finished softly. "And I'm here instead. A poor substitute for the woman you were expecting." "You're not a substitute," Caleb said sharply, the words coming out harsher than he'd intended. He softened his tone. You're the truth. And the truth is harder than the dream, but it's real. That has to count for something." Anna stood, wrapping her arms around herself again as if trying to hold something fragile together. "I should take that stage this morning," she said. "You've been kind, kinder than I deserved, but I can't stay here. Every time you look at me, you'll see what you lost. Every time I speak, you'll hear the letter she dictated. It's not fair to either of us." "Maybe not," Caleb admitted, "but life isn't fair. War taught me that. Loss taught me that. And Margaret's death sure as hell confirmed it." He crossed the room, stopping a few feet from Anna, close enough to see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, the freckles scattered across her nose that no letter had ever mentioned. "You kept a promise to your dying sister," he said. "Traveled 200 miles alone to deliver truth to a stranger. You could have just sent the letter, could have saved yourself this whole painful journey, but you didn't. You came yourself because you thought I deserved to hear it from a real person, not just read it on a page. That takes courage." Anna's eyes glistened. "It wasn't courage, it was guilt." "Maybe it started that way," Caleb said, "but it still took strength to follow through. And Margaret was right about one thing. You are carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you. She got sick because illness doesn't ask permission. She died because bodies fail. None of that is your fault." "You can't know that," Anna whispered. "Yes, I can," Caleb said firmly. "I've seen men die in 100 different ways. Disease, bullets, accidents, plain old bad luck. And the one thing I learned is that death comes when it comes. Guilt doesn't change it. Self-punishment doesn't undo it. All it does is make the living suffer for the dead. and that helps no one. Anna's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Without thinking, Caleb reached out and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a heartbeat, then collapsed against his chest, her fingers clutching his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a world made of water. "I miss her," Anna choked out between sobs. "God, I miss her so much. She was all I had, and I let her down, and now she's gone, and I'm alone, and I don't know how to keep going without her." Caleb held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her trembling shoulders. "I know," he murmured. "I know." They stood like that for a long time, two people bound together by shared grief and the ghost of a woman who had loved them both in different ways. When Anna finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and wet, but some of the terrible tension had left her shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't mean to fall apart like that." "Don't apologize for being human," Caleb said. He handed her his handkerchief, and she took it with a watery smile. "Margaret said you were kind," Anna said, dabbing at her face. "She was right." "She also said you were stronger than you knew," Caleb replied. "Looks like she was right about that, too." Anna laughed, a small, broken sound, but a laugh nonetheless. She always did see things in people that they couldn't see in themselves. Caleb walked back to the table and sat down, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. Anna joined him, and they sat in the morning light, neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Anna broke the silence. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Stay? Go? I'll do whatever you think is best." Caleb considered the question, turning it over in his mind like a stone polished by a river. What did he want? 24 hours ago, he'd wanted Margaret, wanted the woman from the letters to step off that coach and into his life. But that woman was gone, had been gone for months, and wanting her back wouldn't change anything. What he was left with was Anna, real, flawed, grief-stricken Anna, who had kept an impossible promise and carried a burden that was slowly crushing her, who had her sister's stubbornness and her own quiet strength, who was, in her own way, just as lost as he was. "I want you to stay," he heard himself say. "At least for a while. Not because you owe me anything or because Margaret asked you to, but because—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Because we're both grieving the same person, and maybe that's easier to do together than apart." Anna's eyes widened. "You barely know me." "I barely knew Margaret," Caleb countered. "Just knew her words, her thoughts, the version of herself she wanted to share. And those things were real, and they mattered, but they weren't the whole truth." He gestured toward Anna. "You are part of that truth. You helped create those letters, held her hand while she dictated them, made her last months bearable. That matters too." "But I lied to you," Anna protested. "For months I pretended to be her. Every letter after March was a lie." "No," Caleb said firmly. "Every letter after March was an act of love. You gave your sister peace in her final days, and you gave me hope when I needed it. The method might have been deceptive, but the intention was pure. I can't fault you for that." Anna stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "How can you forgive me so easily?" "Because staying angry would be easier," Caleb said. "Anger would give me something to do with all this pain. But Margaret's letter asked me not to close myself off, not to let her death make me bitter. So I'm choosing to do what she asked. I'm choosing to stay open to whatever comes next." He stood and walked to the door, opening it to let in the morning breeze. The scent of sage and dust filled the cabin, mixing with the smell of coffee and biscuits. "Stay for a week," he said. "Just a week. Rest, heal, figure out what you want to do next. I won't pressure you, won't expect anything from you, but I think we both need time to process all this, and doing it in the same space might be better than doing it alone." Anna was quiet for so long that Caleb thought she might refuse. Then, slowly, she nodded. "1 week," she agreed. "But I earn my keep. I'll cook, clean, help with the chores. I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden," Caleb said. "You're a guest." "I'm the woman who broke your heart," Anna replied. "The least I can do is make myself useful while I'm here." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that she hadn't broken anything that wasn't already fractured, But he could see the determination in her eyes, the need to do something, anything, to make amends for sins she hadn't committed. So he simply nodded. All right, 1 week. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The rest of that first day passed in a strange sort of domesticity. Anna cleaned the cabin with a thoroughness that spoke of nervous energy needing an outlet, while Caleb rode out to check the fence line on the eastern pasture. When he returned at midday, the cabin smelled of lye soap and polish, and Anna had made a simple lunch of bread and cheese. They ate on the porch, watching the clouds build on the western horizon. The silence between them was less awkward now, more contemplative. Caleb found himself studying Anna when she wasn't looking, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking, the way her hands were never quite still, the way she seemed to carry herself as if constantly braced for the next blow. Tell me about yourself, he said eventually. Not about Margaret, about you. Who is Anna Hale when she's not carrying someone else's burden? Anna looked startled by the question. I don't know if I remember, she admitted. It's been so long since I was just myself. After our parents died, I was Margaret's sister. After she got sick, I was her caretaker. After she died, I was the keeper of her promises. I'm not sure there's an Anna separate from all of that. There must be, Caleb said. Something you like, something you want, something that's just yours. Anna thought about it, her brow furrowing. I used to draw, she said finally. Before. Nothing fancy, just sketches. Flowers, birds, whatever caught my eye. Margaret said I had a good hand for it, said I could capture the essence of things. Do you still draw? Haven't in years, Anna said. Couldn't afford paper or pencils after our parents died, and later there just wasn't time. Margaret needed me, and drawing seemed frivolous compared to that. Caleb stood abruptly and disappeared into the cabin. He returned a moment later with a leather-bound journal and a pencil. Here, he said, pressing them into Anna's hands. I use these to track cattle and expenses, but there are blank pages in the back. Draw something, anything. Remind yourself who you are beyond all the roles you've had to play. Anna held the journal like it might bite her. I couldn't. This is yours. It's just paper, Caleb said, and paper's meant to be used. If it makes you happy, even for a moment, then it's serving a better purpose than tracking how many head of cattle I've got. Anna's fingers traced the leather cover, and something in her expression softened. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to be this kind. Maybe not, Caleb said, but kindness is free, and we've both had enough of its opposite. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Caleb found Anna sitting on the porch with the journal open in her lap. Her hand moved across the page in quick, confident strokes, and he could see the beginnings of an image taking shape, the windmill in the distance, its blades catching the last light of day. He didn't disturb her, just settled into the rocking chair and watched the sunset in silence. For the first time since Anna had stepped off that coach, he felt something that wasn't quite peace, but might be its distant cousin. The grief was still there, sharp and real, but it no longer felt like it was crushing him. It had become something he could carry, at least for now. As darkness fell, Anna closed the journal and looked over at him. It's beautiful here, she said. Margaret described it in the letters, but seeing it in person, it's different, more real. Everything's more real in person, Caleb said. Words can only do so much. She tried, though, Anna said. In every letter, she tried to bring this place to life for herself. I think she knew she'd never see it, but she wanted to imagine it as clearly as possible. Did it help her? The imagining? Anna nodded. It gave her something to hold on to when the pain got bad. She'd close her eyes and picture herself here, standing next to you, watching the sunset just like this. She'd describe it to me sometimes, and I could see it made her happy, even if it was only in her mind. Caleb felt his throat tighten again. I wish I could have known her, the real her, not just the woman in the letters. You did know her, Anna said gently. Maybe not in person, but you knew the parts of her that mattered most. Her hopes, her dreams, the way she saw the world. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing right now, Caleb admitted. I know, Anna said. But feelings lie sometimes, especially when we're grieving. The truth is that you gave Margaret something precious, a reason to hope, a dream to cling to, a reminder that beauty still existed in the world. That's not nothing. That's everything. They sat in silence as the first stars appeared, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its voice lonely and wild. Anna shivered despite the warmth of the evening, and Caleb stood. "Come on," he said. "It's getting cold. Let's go inside." Anna followed him into the cabin, and they moved through the evening routine with the ease of long practice, despite having only just met. Anna heated water for washing while Caleb banked the fire. They moved around each other carefully, respectfully, two people learning the boundaries of shared space. When it was time to retire, Anna paused at the door to the spare room. "Caleb?" she said, her voice small in the lamplight. He turned. "Yes?" "Thank you for letting me stay, for being more understanding than I had any right to expect. Margaret said you were a good man, and she was right." Caleb felt heat crawl up his neck. "I'm just trying to do what she asked, trying to stay open to whatever comes next." "Well," Anna said with a sad smile, "I don't think either of us could have predicted this." "No," Caleb agreed. "But then again, life rarely goes the way we plan." Anna said goodnight and disappeared into her room. Caleb stood in the main room for a moment, then walked to the table where Margaret's letter still lay. He picked it up, read it one more time, then carefully folded it and placed it in the drawer where he kept important documents. Deeds, receipts, the few letters from his family that had survived the war. As he extinguished the lamp and made his way to his own room, he thought about Margaret's words. Maybe two lonely people could be less lonely together. It wasn't a promise of love or happiness or any of the things he'd hoped for when he'd written to her. It was just a possibility, fragile as morning frost, uncertain as tomorrow's weather. But it was something. And after a day that had taken everything he'd believed and turned it inside out, something was enough. In the spare room, Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The journal rested on the nightstand beside her, the sketch of the windmill still visible in the moonlight that filtered through the window. She'd forgotten how good it felt to create something, to take the chaos of the world and distill it into lines and shadows on a page. She thought about Caleb's kindness, about the way he'd held her while she sobbed, about his insistence that she wasn't to blame for Margaret's death. Part of her wanted to believe him, but belief was a luxury she'd denied herself for so long that she wasn't sure she remembered how. Still, there was something in the way he'd looked at her, not with blame or resentment, but with a weary understanding that spoke of his own acquaintance with loss. It made her think that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to forgive herself. If not now, then eventually. If not alone, then with someone who understood what it meant to carry the weight of the dead. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying with it the promise of rain. The clouds that had been building all day finally released their burden, and soft drops began to patter against the roof. Anna closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of it, letting it lull her toward sleep. In his own room, Caleb heard the rain too. He thought about Margaret, somewhere beyond reach, beyond pain, beyond the need for hope or dreams. He hoped she was at peace, hoped she knew that her final act of love, sending Anna to deliver the truth, had been both cruel and kind, devastating and necessary. He thought about Anna in the next room, a woman who had traveled 200 miles to keep a promise to the dead, a woman who carried guilt like a second skin, who had forgotten who she was beneath the weight of duty and grief, a woman who, despite everything, had managed to draw a windmill at sunset with hands that still remembered beauty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new moments of awkwardness and grief and unexpected grace. But tonight, with rain falling on the roof and two lonely people trying to sleep in a cabin built for solitude, there was a strange sort of peace in knowing they weren't facing their grief alone. The week ahead would test them both, would force them to confront truths they'd been avoiding and feelings they didn't know how to name. But for now, in the gentle darkness of a Texas night, with rain washing the dust from the world outside, it was enough just to rest, just to be, just to take one breath and then another, trusting that morning would come whether they were ready for it or not. And in the space between sleep and waking, between grief and acceptance, between what was lost and what might yet be found, something shifted. Something small and fragile, like the first green shoot pushing through winter earth, a possibility that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. Neither of them named it. Neither of them acknowledged it. But it was there all the same, waiting to see if the light of day would help it grow or wither it back into nothing. Only time would tell. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning, turning the world soft and gray. Caleb woke to the sound of it drumming against the roof, a steady rhythm that spoke of the sky emptying itself of burden. He lay in bed for a moment, listening, and realized with some surprise that he'd actually slept. Not well, perhaps, but sleep had come nonetheless. A small mercy in a week that had offered precious few. When he emerged from his room, he found Anna already in the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The smell of coffee filled the cabin, rich and dark, and there was bread rising in a bowl on the counter. "You didn't have to do all this," Caleb said, his voice still rough with sleep. Anna glanced up, and he caught a glimpse of shadows under her eyes that told him her rest had been no better than his own. "I told you I'd earn my keep," she said. "Besides, I've been up for hours. Couldn't sleep, so I figured I might as well be useful." Caleb poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her work. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, kneading the dough with a rhythm that seemed almost meditative. There was something soothing about it, about the simple domesticity of the scene. Rain falling outside, bread rising inside, steam curling from his coffee cup. "My mother used to make bread on rainy mornings," Anna said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "Said there was something about the weather that made the dough rise better. I think she just liked having something to do when we couldn't work outside." She paused, her hands stilling for a moment. "Margaret kept the tradition after Mama died. Every rainy morning, without fail, there'd be bread." "Is that what you're doing now?" Caleb asked gently. "Keeping the tradition?" Anna's smile was sad. "I suppose I am. Feels strange making her bread without her, but it also feels right somehow. Like she's still here in small ways." "She is," Caleb said, "in you. In the things she taught you, the habits she gave you. That doesn't die just because a heart stops beating." Anna looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. "You say things like that so easily," she said, "like you've made peace with loss. How did you do it? How did you learn to live with grief?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I'm not sure I have learned," he admitted finally. "The war took people I loved, brothers in arms, friends who were closer than family. For a long time, I thought the only way to survive was to stop feeling anything at all. To just shut down." He took a sip of coffee, using the moment to gather his thoughts. "But that's not living, that's just existing. So I guess what I learned was that grief doesn't go away. You just learn to carry it differently. Some days it's a boulder on your back. Other days it's a pebble in your pocket. But it's always there." "And Margaret?" Anna asked softly. "How will you carry her?" Caleb looked out the window at the rain-soaked landscape. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "Right now it feels like that boulder, but maybe eventually it'll become something I can hold in my hand, a weight I can examine, can understand, can set down when I need to. I'm not there yet." "Neither am I," Anna whispered. "With her, I mean. It's been months and it still feels like yesterday. Still feels like if I just turn around fast enough, she'll be there, smiling that smile she had, telling me everything will be all right." They stood in silence, both lost in memories of a woman who had bound their lives together in the strangest of ways. Outside, the rain began to ease, the downpour gentling into a steady drizzle that painted the world in shades of silver. "Come on," Caleb said abruptly, setting down his cup. "Get your shawl. I want to show you something." Anna looked confused, but did as he asked, wrapping herself in the thin shawl while Caleb shrugged into his oilskin coat. He led her out into the rain, down the porch steps and across the muddy yard. The earth squelched beneath their feet, and Anna laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that seemed to startle her as much as it did him. "Where are we going?" she asked, having to raise her voice slightly over the sound of the rain. "You'll see," was all Caleb said. He led her past the barn, past the chicken coop, out to where the land began to slope gently downward. And there, in a little hollow, protected from the worst of the wind, was a creek that Caleb had mentioned in his letters. The rain had swollen it, turning it from a trickle into something alive and rushing, silver water dancing over smooth stones. "This is it," Caleb said, stopping at the edge. "This is what I wrote to Margaret about. The creek that runs silver in the moonlight." Anna stared at the water, and he saw her eyes widen with recognition. "She loved your descriptions of this place," she said. "Made me read them to her over and over. She said it sounded like music, the way you described the water." "It does sound like music," Caleb said. "Listen." They stood together in the rain, listening to the creek's song, the gurgle and rush of water over stone, the patter of raindrops on the surface, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods that lined the banks. And standing there, wet and cold, but somehow not minding, Caleb felt something in his chest ease slightly. This was real. This was solid. This was something that existed beyond letters and grief and broken promises. "Thank you for showing me," Anna said quietly. "I can see why she loved it, why she wanted to be here." "She is here," Caleb said. "In a way. Every place I described to her, every sunrise I tried to capture in words, she's part of all of it now. Her imagination made these places mean something more than they did before." Anna turned to look at him, rain running down her face, mixing with what might have been tears. "You're a better man than I gave you credit for," she said. "When I agreed to keep writing after she died, I thought I was doing it for her. But maybe I was also doing it for you. Because a man who could see the world the way you did deserved to keep that light, even if the reason for it was a lie." "It wasn't a lie," Caleb said firmly. "The feelings were real. The connection was real. The only lie was thinking we had more time than we did. But that's a lie we all tell ourselves, isn't it? That there's always tomorrow, always another chance. Life doesn't work that way." They walked back to the cabin slowly, neither speaking, both soaked to the skin but neither particularly caring. When they reached the porch, Anna paused. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice hesitant, "and I need you to be honest with me." "All right," Caleb said. "Do you resent me?" The question came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding it back and finally couldn't any longer. "For not being her? For being the one who showed up instead of the woman you were expecting? Do you look at me and wish I was Margaret?" Caleb considered the question carefully, knowing that his answer mattered more than most things he'd said in his life. "At first, yes," he admitted. "When you stepped off that coach and said those words, all I could think about was what I'd lost, what I'd been denied. And you were standing there, alive and real, and she wasn't. So yes, there was resentment." Anna's face fell, but Caleb continued. "But that resentment wasn't about you," he said. "It was about the situation, about the unfairness of it all. And it lasted maybe an hour, maybe less. Because once I read Margaret's letter, once I understood what you'd done and why, the resentment disappeared. What you did was an act of love. Complicated, painful love, but love nonetheless. How can I resent that?" "But do you wish I was her?" Anna pressed. Caleb shook his head slowly. "I wish I'd had the chance to meet her, yes. I wish things had been different. But wishing you were someone else? No. You are who you are. A woman who kept an impossible promise, who loved her sister enough to carry her words after death, who's been beating herself up for months over something that wasn't your fault. That's who you are. And that person deserves to exist on her own terms, not as a substitute for someone else." Anna's breath caught, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the rain already there. "I don't know how to be that person," she whispered. "I don't know how to be anything other than Margaret's sister, Margaret's caretaker, Margaret's ghost." "Then we'll figure it out," Caleb said. "Together, one day at a time, starting with getting out of these wet clothes before we both catch our death." Anna laughed through her tears, a watery sound that nonetheless held a note of genuine amusement. They went inside and Caleb stoked the fire while Anna changed into dry clothes. When she emerged, wrapped in a blanket and looking younger than her years, he handed her a cup of hot tea he'd brewed. "Drink," he said, "and then tell me what you want to do today." Anna blinked, surprised. "What I want?" "Yes," Caleb said. "What you want. Not what you think you should do, not what would be useful or proper. What does Anna Hale want to do on a rainy Tuesday morning?" Anna stared into her tea as if the answer might be floating there. I want to draw, she said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. I want to sit by that window and draw the creek and the rain and pretend just for a little while that I'm the kind of person who gets to do things just because they make her happy. Then do it, Caleb said simply. I've got mending to do anyway. We can keep each other company in the quiet. And so they did. Anna settled by the window with the journal and pencil, her face intent as she captured the landscape in lines and shadows. Caleb sat at the table with a basket of clothes that needed patching, his needle moving in and out of fabric with the kind of mindless rhythm that freed his thoughts to wander. They worked in companionable silence for hours, the only sounds the crackling of the fire, the scratch of pencil on paper, and the gentle patter of rain that had returned. It was peaceful in a way Caleb hadn't experienced in years, not the peace of solitude, but the peace of shared presence, of knowing someone else was there without needing to fill every moment with words. When the bread was ready, Anna baked it, and the smell filled the cabin with warmth and comfort. They ate lunch together, tearing off chunks of the still hot bread and spreading it with butter, and Caleb found himself watching Anna's face as she ate. There was something different about her expression today, less haunted perhaps, or maybe just tired in a way that was more honest than the brittle composure she'd worn yesterday. Tell me about your drawings, he said. What did you like to draw before? Less haunted perhaps, or maybe just tired in a way that was more honest than the brittle composure she'd worn yesterday. Tell me about your drawings, he said. What did you like to draw before? Before everything changed? Anna swallowed her bite of bread and thought about it. Ordinary things mostly, she said. Flowers in window boxes, birds on fence posts, the way sunlight fell through curtains. Margaret used to tease me about it, said I could make anything look magical if I paid enough attention to it. Sounds like you and I might have had something in common, Caleb said. I wrote about ordinary things the same way, fence posts and sunrises and the way the wind sounds different depending on which direction it comes from. That's why she loved your letters so much, Anna said. You saw the world the way she did, like it was full of small miracles just waiting to be noticed. Is that how you see it too? Anna paused, her expression troubled. I used to, before, when I was younger and the world seemed less heavy. But losing our parents, watching Margaret get sick, all of that, it changed something, made it harder to see the miracles, made it easier to just see the pain. Pain's easier to see sometimes, Caleb agreed. Takes less effort. Miracles require attention, require you to slow down and really look. After the war, I lost that ability for a while. Everything just looked gray to me, the land, the sky, even people. It was like someone had drained all the color out of the world. What changed? Anna asked, leaning forward slightly. Caleb smiled, a small, almost embarrassed expression. A hummingbird of all things. I was sitting on this porch one morning, feeling about as low as a man can feel, and this tiny bird showed up at the wildflowers I'd planted. It was this brilliant green with a throat that flashed red when it caught the light, and I just watched it, couldn't look away. And somewhere in that watching, I remembered that beautiful things still existed, that they'd existed all along, even when I couldn't see them. And then you started writing to Margaret, Anna said softly. And then I started writing to Margaret, Caleb confirmed. Started trying to put into words all the things I was learning to see again. And the more I wrote about them, the more real they became, the more they mattered. Anna was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table. Do you think it's possible to learn to see that way again, after you've lost it? I think it's possible, Caleb said. Hard, but possible. You just have to be willing to pay attention, to notice the small things even when the big things are trying to crush you. Like drawing windmills, Anna said with a faint smile. Like drawing windmills, Caleb agreed. The afternoon wore on, and the rain finally stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. Caleb suggested they check on the animals, and Anna agreed, grateful for the movement after hours of sitting still. They walked through the barnyard together, Caleb pointing out different aspects of the property, Anna asking questions that showed genuine interest. When they reached the pasture where Caleb's small herd of cattle grazed, Anna stopped to watch them. Margaret wrote about these, she said, about how you described each one like they had personalities. They do, Caleb said. That one there, the brown and white spotted one, that's Bessie. Stubborn as they come, but loyal. Always the first to come when I call. And that black one, that's Midnight. Skittish, always watching for danger, but she's got the best maternal instincts of the bunch. Anna laughed. You really do see them as individuals. Why wouldn't I? Caleb asked. They're living creatures, same as us. They feel things, have preferences, remember kindnesses and cruelties. Seems disrespectful to treat them like they're all the same. Margaret said you had a poet's soul, Anna said, and there was wonder in her voice. I didn't understand what she meant until now. Caleb felt heat creep up his neck. I'm just a rancher who pays attention. That's what a poet is, Anna said softly. Someone who pays attention and then finds the words to share what they've seen. They walked back to the cabin as the sun began to break through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light across the wet landscape. Everything sparkled, the grass, the trees, even the mud puddles caught the light and turned it into something beautiful. Anna stopped several times to just look, and Caleb found himself seeing the familiar landscape through her eyes, finding new things to appreciate. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Anna asked, What would you have done if she had come? If Margaret had stepped off that coach instead of me? Caleb paused in his chopping of vegetables. It was a question he'd been avoiding, even in his own thoughts. I don't know, he admitted. I'd built up this image of her in my mind, this perfect woman who understood me in ways no one else did. But images aren't the same as reality. She might have stepped off that coach, and we might have realized we'd imagined each other wrong. Or she might have been exactly what I hoped for. There's no way to know. Do you think you could have loved her? Anna asked. The real her, not the woman in the letters? I think I already did love her. In a way, Caleb said slowly, working through his thoughts as he spoke them. But it was love for potential, for possibility, for what might be rather than what was. Real love, the kind that lasts, that takes time. Takes living with someone, seeing them at their worst, learning their flaws and choosing to stay anyway. We never would have had that chance. Anna was quiet, stirring the pot on the stove with more attention than it needed. She loved you too, she said finally. In her way. She used to talk about you like you were already real to her, like she'd known you for years instead of months. I think that's why she couldn't stop writing, even when she knew she was dying, because in those letters, in that shared imagination, you were both alive and together and happy. It was the only place where that was possible. Caleb's chest tightened with emotion. I wish it could have been different, he said, his voice rough. So do I, Anna whispered, more than you know. They ate dinner quietly, both lost in thoughts of what might have been. But when the meal was done and the dishes were washed, Caleb brought out the journal again and handed it to Anna. Draw something else, he said. Something from your imagination this time. Not what you see, but what you feel. Anna looked uncertain. I don't know if I can. It's been so long since I let myself feel anything creative. Mostly I just feel sad or guilty or tired. Then draw that, Caleb said. Draw what sadness looks like to you, or guilt, or exhaustion. Give it a shape, a form. Sometimes that helps, making the invisible visible. Anna took the journal with trembling hands and sat by the fire. Caleb settled into his rocking chair with a book, but he found himself watching her more than reading. Her face was intent, her hand moving across the page with growing confidence. Occasionally she would pause, staring into the fire as if seeking inspiration in the flames, then return to her work with renewed purpose. When she finally set down the pencil, it was full dark outside. She held up the journal, showing Caleb what she'd created. It wasn't a literal drawing, but something more abstract. A tangle of lines and shadows that seemed to spiral inward, growing darker and more compressed toward the center. But at the very edge, almost escaping the page, were thin lines reaching outward like fingers grasping for light. It's beautiful, Caleb said, and he meant it. Painful, but beautiful. That's what grief feels like to me, Anna said, like being trapped in this spiral, pulled deeper and deeper into darkness. But there's always this part of me trying to reach out, trying to escape, even when I don't think I deserve to. Why wouldn't you deserve to escape? Caleb asked gently. Anna's eyes filled with tears, because she's stuck in that darkness forever, and I'm the reason why. How can I reach for the light when she never will, Caleb set down his book and moved to kneel in front of Anna's chair, taking her hands in his. Anna, listen to me. Margaret isn't in darkness. She's not trapped anywhere. She's gone, yes, but not suffering, not stuck, not waiting for you to join her in some eternal punishment. She's just gone. At peace, hopefully, but definitely not in pain. You can't know that, Anna said, tears streaming down her face. You're right, I can't, Caleb admitted. But I can choose to believe it, and I can choose to believe that she wouldn't want you trapped in guilt for the rest of your life. That's not love. That's cruelty. And Margaret was many things, but she wasn't cruel. Anna sobbed, her whole body shaking with the force of it. Caleb pulled her forward, and she slid from the chair onto the floor, collapsing against his chest as she had the day before. He held her, one hand stroking her hair, the other wrapped firmly around her back. Let it out, he murmured, all of it. Every bit of grief and guilt and pain you've been carrying, let it out. And Anna did. She cried for her sister, for herself, for all the dreams that had died in a sick room in Abilene. She cried for the burden of secrets she'd carried, for the loneliness that had become her constant companion, for the future she'd thought she'd have and the reality she'd been given instead. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was just a hollow, exhausted thing clinging to another human being because she couldn't hold herself up anymore. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back slightly, her face blotchy and swollen, her eyes red-rimmed. I'm sorry, she whispered. I keep falling apart on you. Stop apologizing for being human, Caleb said, echoing his words from before. Grief needs to come out somehow. Better tears than other things. Anna nodded, wiping at her face with her sleeve. I must look terrible. You look like someone who's been carrying too much for too long, Caleb said, and who's finally starting to set it down. He helped her to her feet, and they stood there for a moment, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, the freckles on her nose, the way her lower lip trembled slightly as she tried to compose herself. Something passed between them in that moment, not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to survive loss, to keep going when everything in you wanted to stop. Thank you, Anna said softly. For everything. For not being angry, for not sending me away, for letting me grieve even though it's messy and painful and probably exhausting to witness. It's not exhausting, Caleb said. It's honest, and honest is something I can work with. Anna managed a small smile, then turned toward her room. She paused at the door, looking back at him. Caleb, do you think we'll be all right, eventually? Caleb thought about the question, about all the ways it could be answered. I think we'll survive, he said finally, and maybe that's enough for now. We can work on all right later. Anna nodded, seeming to accept that, and disappeared into her room. Caleb stood in the main room for a long moment, then walked to the window and stared out at the night sky. The clouds had cleared, revealing a field of stars so vast and brilliant it made him ache. He thought about Margaret, somewhere beyond those stars, beyond reach but not beyond memory. He thought about Anna, in the next room, slowly learning to be a person separate from her grief. And he thought about himself, standing in a cabin he'd built with his own hands, trying to figure out how to move forward when the future he'd imagined had been swept away. The answer didn't come to him that night, but standing there, with the stars above and the quiet breathing of another person just beyond the wall, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel again. Not hope, exactly, but its smaller, more tentative cousin. A sense that maybe, possibly, eventually, things might not always hurt this much. It would have to be enough. He turned from the window, banked the fire, and made his way to his own room. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he heard soft sounds from Anna's room, not crying, but the gentle rustle of pages. She was drawing again, he realized, finding solace in lines and shadows, in the act of creation that required her to focus on something beyond her pain. Caleb closed his eyes and let the sound lull him toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new moments of grief and grace intertwined. But tonight, in the darkness of a Texas ranch house, with rain-washed air seeping through the windows and stars wheeling overhead, there was peace, fragile and temporary, perhaps, but real. And in the morning, When the sun rose over the plains and turned the wet grass to silver, they would both be there to see it. Together but separate, grieving but surviving, lost but slowly finding their way towards something that might, someday, look like healing. The week wasn't over yet. There were still days to navigate, truths to face, decisions to make. But they'd made it through 2 days. 2 impossible, heartbreaking, strangely beautiful days. And that was something. That was perhaps everything. Morning came with a clarity that seemed almost defiant after the rain. The sky stretched endlessly blue without even a wisp of cloud to mar its perfection, and the air carried that particular crispness that follows a storm, as if the world had been rinsed clean and hung out to dry. Caleb woke to the sound of Anna moving about in the kitchen, humming something soft and tuneless under her breath. It was such an ordinary sound, so domestic and unremarkable, that for a moment he forgot the weight of the past few days and simply lay there, listening. When he finally emerged, he found Anna at the stove, her hair braided and pinned up, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, and he was struck by how different she looked this morning. The shadows under her eyes remained, but something in her bearing had shifted. She stood straighter, moved with more purpose, as if some internal decision had been made during the night. "I made eggs," she said, gesturing toward the pan. "And there's coffee. I hope that's all right." "More than all right," Caleb said, reaching for a cup. "You didn't have to, though. I'm used to fending for myself." "I know," Anna said, plating the eggs with careful attention, "but I wanted to. Needed to, really. Cooking helps me think, helps me feel like I'm doing something useful." She paused, then added quietly, "And I had a lot to think about last night." They sat down to eat, and Caleb waited, sensing she had more to say. Anna pushed her eggs around her plate for a moment before speaking. "I've been unfair to you," she said finally. "Coming here, bringing all this pain and grief, expecting you to just absorb it all. You lost something too when Margaret died. You lost the future you'd imagined, the hope you'd built. And here I am, falling apart in your home, asking you to hold me together when you're probably barely holding yourself together." "Anna, please let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I need to say this." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Last night, after I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said about Margaret not being in darkness, about me not deserving to be trapped in guilt. And I realized something. I've been so focused on what I did wrong, on how I failed her, that I forgot to honor what I did right." Caleb set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "I stayed," Anna continued, her voice growing stronger. "When she got sick, when it got hard, when I was scared and exhausted and wanted to run away, I stayed. I held her hand, I read to her, I wrote those letters when her hands couldn't hold a pen anymore. I kept her comfortable, kept her company, made sure she didn't die alone. That has to count for something, doesn't it?" "It counts for everything," Caleb said firmly. Anna's eyes glistened, but she blinked back the tears. "Then I need to start acting like it. I need to stop punishing myself for the one night I wasn't there and start remembering all the nights I was. All the days I was. All the moments I gave her, even when I had nothing left to give." "That sounds like wisdom," Caleb said softly. "It sounds like something Margaret would have said," Anna replied with a sad smile. "She was always better at forgiving than I was. Better at seeing the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." She looked directly at Caleb. "Including me. Including you." "What do you mean, including me?" Anna leaned back in her chair, considering her words. "In her letters, the real ones, the ones she wrote to me about you, she said you were carrying ghosts. War ghosts, she called them. Shadows of things you'd seen and done that you couldn't quite shake. She said your letters were beautiful but haunted, like you were trying to convince yourself that beauty still existed in a world that had shown you otherwise." Caleb felt something clench in his chest. "She saw that? In my words?" "She saw everything," Anna said. "That's who she was. She could read between the lines, could hear what people weren't saying. She said that's why she fell in love with you, because you were trying so hard to find light in the darkness, and she understood that struggle. She was doing the same thing." The silence that followed was heavy with revelation. Caleb had never thought of his letters that way, never realized how much of his own pain he'd been inadvertently sharing. He'd thought he was writing about beauty, about hope, about new beginnings. But Margaret had seen deeper, had recognized a kindred spirit fighting the same battle against despair. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I thought I was hiding it better than that." "You can't hide your soul from someone who's looking for it," Anna said, and Margaret was always looking, always trying to understand people, to see them clearly, to love them despite their wounds. She paused. Or maybe because of them. Caleb stood abruptly and walked to the window, needing distance, needing air. The morning sun was climbing higher, turning the wet grass into fields of diamond. Beautiful, yes, but Anna was right. It was a haunted beauty, shadowed by everything he'd lost along the way. "The war took more than lives," he said, his voice low. "It took certainty, I guess. The belief that the world made sense, that good was rewarded and evil punished, that courage mattered and honor meant something. I saw men die for no reason, saw cruelty rewarded and kindness crushed. And when it was over, when I came home, or what was left of home, I didn't know how to live in a world like that anymore." He heard Anna rise and move closer, felt her presence behind him like warmth. "So I came here," he continued, "to this empty land where nothing had happened yet, where I could build something from scratch without the weight of history pressing down on it. I thought if I could just work hard enough, stay isolated enough, I could outrun what I'd seen, what I'd done." "But you couldn't," Anna said softly. "No," Caleb agreed. "The ghosts followed me, they always do, so I tried something else. I tried to find beauty, tried to notice the small things, tried to convince myself that a world with hummingbirds and sunsets and silver creeks was still worth living in." He turned to face her. "And then came the letters. And Margaret. And for the first time in years, I thought maybe I wasn't alone in that fight. Maybe someone else understood what it meant to search for light in a world that seemed determined to snuff it out." Anna's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "You weren't alone. You aren't alone. Margaret understood, and I think I'm starting to understand too." "What do you understand?" Anna moved to stand beside him at the window, their shoulders almost touching. "That survival isn't the same as living. That you can breathe and eat and move through days without actually being alive. I've been doing that since Margaret died, surviving, but not living. Punishing myself because being in pain felt like the only way to stay connected to her." She took a shaky breath. "But that's not what she would have wanted. She wanted me to live, wanted you to live. That's why she kept writing, why she made me promise to keep writing. She was trying to give us both permission to keep going, to keep looking for beauty, to keep believing the world was worth the effort." "And do you believe it?" Caleb asked. "Do you think it's worth it?" Anna was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the sun-drenched landscape. "I think I'm starting to," she said finally. "Being here, seeing this place she wrote about, watching you tend to your land and your animals like they matter, it's reminding me that there's more to life than grief. That beauty exists whether we're paying attention or not, and maybe our job is just to notice it, to bear witness to it." Caleb felt something shift in his chest, some knot loosening. "I'd like to think she'd be proud of us," he said. "For trying, at least. For not giving up." "I think she would be," Anna said. She turned to face him fully. "Caleb, I need to tell you something. About why I really came here." Caleb's stomach tightened. "I thought you came to deliver the letter, to keep your promise." "I did," Anna said quickly, "but that's not the whole truth." She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as self-protection. "After Margaret died, I had nothing left. No family, no purpose, no reason to keep going. The only thing I had was her promise. The promise to write to you, to keep you hoping, to eventually tell you the truth. It became my entire world, my only connection to something that felt meaningful." She paused, gathering courage. "But as the months went on, as I wrote those letters in her hand, I started to feel like I was disappearing, like I was becoming her ghost, just a vessel for her words and her feelings. And I hated it, but I also needed it, because at least when I was writing those letters, I was still connected to her. I was still useful. I still mattered." Anna, let me finish, she said. Please. When the time came to deliver the truth, I was terrified. Not just because I knew it would hurt you, but because I knew that once I did it, once I fulfilled that final promise, I'd have nothing left. No purpose, no connection, no reason to exist. I'd just be Anna again. Just me, alone, with nothing and no one. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. So part of me came here hoping you'd reject me. Hoping you'd be so angry, so devastated, that you'd send me away and I could spend the rest of my life punishing myself for it. Because punishment felt safer than having to figure out who I am without her. Who I am when I'm not defined by my relationship to someone else. Caleb reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. And now? He asked softly. What do you hope for now? Anna's laugh was watery, broken. Now I hope I can learn to be just Anna. Not Margaret's sister, not her ghost, not her keeper, just me, whoever that is. I'd like to help you figure that out, Caleb said, if you'll let me. Anna looked at him with something like wonder. Why? Why would you want to help me after everything I've done? Because Margaret was right, Caleb said simply. Maybe two lonely people can be less lonely together. Maybe we can help each other find our way back to living instead of just surviving. Maybe that's what all of this has been about. Not the love story I thought I was writing with Margaret, but a different kind of story altogether. One about two people who got broken by life and are trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together. Anna closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something had changed. There was a clarity there, a determination that hadn't been present before. I want to stay, she said. Not for a week. Longer. If you'll have me. Not as Margaret's replacement, not as some kind of consolation prize, but as myself. As someone who's trying to heal and needs a safe place to do it. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest. This was a turning point, he realized. A moment that would define everything that came after. He could say no, could send her away, could retreat back into his carefully constructed solitude. Or he could say yes, could take the risk, could open himself to the possibility of connection, even knowing how much it could hurt. Stay, he said, as long as you need. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Anna's smile was tremulous but genuine. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me. For not just seeing her in me. I see you, Caleb said. I see Anna. And I think I'd like to get to know her better. They stood there for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the window, warming them both. Then Anna stepped back, wiping her face with her sleeve, and took a deep, steadying breath. All right then, she said, squaring her shoulders. If I'm staying, I should probably learn more about this place. About your work. I can't just sit around drawing all day. Caleb smiled. You can if you want to, but if you'd like to help, I've got plenty that needs doing. And so they spent the day together, Caleb teaching Anna about the rhythms of ranch life. He showed her how to check the cattle for signs of illness, how to mend fence posts, how to read the sky for weather. Anna asked questions constantly, her curiosity endless, and Caleb found himself enjoying the teaching. It gave him a new way to see his own work, explaining it to fresh eyes. As they walked the fence line in the afternoon, Anna paused to watch a hawk circling overhead, its wings catching the light. Margaret would have loved that, she said. Then she corrected herself. No, I love that. I, Anna, love watching that hawk. She looked at Caleb with a shy smile. I'm practicing. Practicing claiming things for myself instead of always filtering them through her. How does it feel? Caleb asked. Anna thought about it. Strange, scary, but also freeing, maybe? Like I'm discovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. They continued their walk, and Caleb found himself sharing more about his own past. He told her about the war, about the battles and the fear and the ways it had changed him. He told her about coming home to find his family's farm sold off to pay debts, about the years of drifting before he'd finally claimed this land. He told her things he'd never told anyone, and Anna listened with the same intense attention Margaret had brought to his letters. You're a survivor, she said when he finished, like me. We've both been through things that should have broken us, but we're still here, still trying. Does that make us strong or just stubborn? Caleb asked with a wry smile. Both, Anna said. Definitely both. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Anna asked, "What do you miss most about the life you thought you'd have with Margaret?" Caleb paused in his chopping. It was a painful question, but he appreciated her asking it. "The dream, I suppose," he said finally. "The idea of coming home to someone, of having conversations over dinner, of sharing the small moments of a day, of not being alone with my thoughts all the time." "You're not alone now," Anna pointed out. "No," Caleb agreed. "I'm not." He looked at her. "What about you? What do you miss most about the life you had before?" Anna's expression grew distant. "Feeling needed," she said. "Margaret needed me, and that gave me purpose. Now I don't know what my purpose is. Don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this time I thought I wouldn't have." "Maybe that's the gift," Caleb said. "Time to figure out what you want, not what someone else needs from you." "That's terrifying," Anna admitted. "Most worthwhile things are," Caleb replied. They ate dinner on the porch as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Anna had brought the journal with her, and as they sat in comfortable silence, she sketched the sunset, her hand moving with growing confidence across the page. "Can I ask you something?" she said without looking up from her drawing. "Of course." "Do you think you could ever love someone again? After Margaret?" Caleb was quiet, considering the question honestly. "I don't know," he said finally. "The love I felt for Margaret was mostly hope and imagination, real love, the kind that grows between two people who actually know each other, that takes time, takes trust, takes being willing to be vulnerable with someone who could hurt you." He paused. "But I think I could get there, eventually, with the right person." Anna's hand stilled on the page. "What would make someone the right person?" "Honesty," Caleb said immediately. "Someone who shows me who they really are, flaws and all. Someone who's willing to do the hard work of healing instead of just hiding their wounds. Someone who can sit in silence with me and not need to fill every moment with noise." He looked at Anna. "Someone who understands what it means to survive something that should have destroyed you and who's still trying to find beauty in the world despite it." Anna met his gaze, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Understanding. The acknowledgement that they were both describing each other without quite saying so. "I think Margaret knew," Anna said softly. "I think she knew that if I came here, if I told you the truth, this might happen. Not love, not right away, but the possibility of it, the foundation for it. Do you think that's why she asked you to come, instead of just sending the letter?" "Maybe," Anna said. "Margaret was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, always seeing possibilities that other people missed. Maybe she saw this, saw us, and thought it was worth a chance." "Would you want that?" Caleb asked carefully. "A chance at this? At whatever this is or could be?" Anna set down the journal, giving the question the weight it deserved. "I think I'd like the possibility of it," she said finally. "Not now, not while we're both still so raw, but someday, when we've both done the work of healing, of figuring out who we are separately. Then maybe we could figure out who we might be together." "That seems wise," Caleb said. "That seems terrifying," Anna countered with a slight smile. "But also honest. And you said honesty was important." "It is," Caleb agreed. "It's everything." They sat together as the sun finished its descent and the first stars began to appear. Caleb thought about the week he'd offered Anna, about how it was already clear that she would need more than a week to heal, to discover herself, to prepare for whatever came next. And he realized he was glad. Glad for her presence, glad for her honesty, glad for the way she was slowly teaching him that grief didn't have to be a solitary journey. "Anna," he said as the darkness deepened. "Yes? I'm glad you came. I'm glad you kept your promise to Margaret. And I'm glad you're staying." Anna's smile was visible even in the dim light. "So am I," she said. "So am I." The night deepened around them, and eventually they went inside. Anna returned to her sketching by the fire, while Caleb wrote in his own journal, not a letter this time, but simply his thoughts, his feelings, his observations about the strange and unexpected turn his life had taken. He wrote about Margaret, about the grief that would always be a part of him. But he also wrote about Anna, about the slow unfurling of possibility, about the way healing sometimes looked like two broken people learning to be whole in each other's presence. When he finally set down his pen, he looked over at Anna and found her watching him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That life is strange," Caleb said. "That it takes us places we never expected to go and gives us things we never knew we needed." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "I think it's just a thing," Caleb said. "Neither good nor bad. Just real." Anna nodded, accepting this. "I can work with real," she said. "Real is better than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "Pretending," Anna said. "Hiding, living in the past or in might-have-beens instead of in what actually is." She closed her journal. "I've done enough of that. I'm ready to try something different." "What's that?" Anna stood and stretched, looking suddenly exhausted. "Living," she said simply. "Actually living. Being present in each moment, even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones, because those are the ones that teach us who we really are." Caleb stood as well, and they faced each other across the firelit room. "That sounds like wisdom again," he said. "That sounds like something I'm trying to learn," Anna corrected. "There's a difference." "Fair enough," Caleb said with a small smile. They said goodnight, and Anna disappeared into her room. But before Caleb could turn toward his own, she opened the door again and peeked out. "Caleb?" "Yes?" "Thank you for letting me practice being Anna here, for giving me a safe place to figure out who that is." "Thank you for trusting me enough to do it," Caleb replied. Anna smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Then she closed the door, and Caleb was alone with his thoughts. He stood in the main room for a while, listening to the sounds of the night, the creak of the cabin settling, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant call of an owl. And beneath it all, the soft scratch of pencil on paper as Anna drew something in the privacy of her room. He thought about Margaret's letter, about her final wish that he stay open to whatever came next. He thought about the impossible tangle of grief and hope, loss and possibility that had brought Anna to his door. And he thought about the future, not the one he'd imagined, but the one that was slowly taking shape, unexpected and uncertain, but somehow right. As he climbed into bed, Caleb realized something that surprised him. For the first time since Anna had stepped off that coach and spoken those 6 devastating words, he felt something other than pain when he thought about what had happened. He felt gratitude. Gratitude for Margaret's letters, for the hope they'd given him. Gratitude for Anna's courage in delivering the truth, and gratitude for the strange, winding path that had led them both here, to this moment, to this fragile beginning of something neither of them had planned but both of them needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new steps on the long road to healing. But tonight, in the darkness of a Texas ranch house, with 2 lonely people sleeping under the same roof and learning to be less lonely together, there was something that felt almost like peace. Not the peace of resolution or closure or answers, but the peace of presence, of being exactly where they were, with exactly who they were, and trusting that it was enough. For now, at least, it was enough. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt both foreign and strangely inevitable, like a song Caleb had known once but forgotten until someone began humming the melody. Anna moved through the cabin with growing ease, her initial hesitancy giving way to something more comfortable, more rooted. She still had moments when grief would catch her unaware. Caleb would find her standing motionless at the window, tears streaming silently down her face, or wake in the night to the muffled sound of her crying in the next room. But between these moments of sorrow, there were others that felt like small victories, like shoots of green pushing through scorched earth. On the 5th morning of Anna's stay, Caleb woke to find her already outside, standing in the pasture with Bessie, the spotted cow he'd described in his letters. Anna had her hand on the animal's flank, speaking softly, and Caleb watched from the porch as Bessie, usually skittish with strangers, leaned into Anna's touch with something like contentment. When Anna returned to the cabin, her face was flushed with cold and pleasure. "She let me pet her," she said, breathless with the simple wonder of it. "I was just standing there, and she walked right up to me, like she knew I needed the company." "Animals have a sense about people," Caleb said, pouring her coffee. They can tell when someone's hurting, when someone needs gentle handling. Bessie's always been good at that. Anna cupped her hands around the warm mug, her eyes distant. Margaret used to say the same thing about people, that some folks just had a gift for knowing what others needed, even before they knew it themselves. She looked at Caleb. She said you had that gift. That's what came through in your letters, this deep attention to the world, this way of noticing what mattered. Well, I'm not sure it's a gift, Caleb said. More like survival. You learn to pay attention when your life depends on it. In the war, reading people, reading situations. It meant the difference between living and dying. And after the war, Anna asked, when it wasn't life or death anymore? Caleb leaned against the counter, considering. I guess I didn't know how to stop. Didn't know how to exist without that constant awareness, that vigilance. So I turned it toward other things, the land, the animals, the sky. If I was going to be cursed with always paying attention, I figured I might as well pay attention to things that couldn't hurt me. But then you started writing to Margaret, Anna said softly. Started paying attention to her words, her thoughts. Started letting yourself care about something that could hurt you. Yes, Caleb admitted. I did. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of that admission settling between them. Then Anna set down her coffee and moved to the stove. Let me make breakfast, she said. I want to try something Margaret used to make. Johnny cakes with molasses. She'd make them on special occasions, and they always felt like a celebration, even when there wasn't much to celebrate. Caleb watched as Anna gathered ingredients, her movements gaining confidence as she worked. She mixed cornmeal and flour, added buttermilk and a pinch of salt, her hands moving with the unconscious grace of someone following a well-worn path of memory. As the cakes sizzled on the griddle, filling the cabin with their sweet, corny smell, Caleb saw tears sliding down Anna's face. But she didn't stop working, didn't acknowledge them. She just kept cooking, kept moving, kept pushing through the grief to create something beautiful on the other side. When she plated the Johnny cakes and drizzled them with molasses, her hands were steady. They sat down to eat, and Caleb took a bite. The flavors simple but perfect, slightly sweet, slightly savory, warm and comforting. These are wonderful, he said. Anna smiled through her tears. She would have been happy to know I still remember how. Happy to know I'm sharing them with you. I think she'd be happy about a lot of things, Caleb said carefully. About you being here. About you learning to live again. I hope so, Anna whispered. God, I hope so. That afternoon, Caleb had to ride into Cedar Bluff for supplies. He asked Anna if she wanted to come along, but she declined, saying she preferred to stay at the cabin, to spend time with the journal and the quiet. Caleb understood. The town meant people, questions, explanations that neither of them was ready to give. So he left her there, promising to return before dark. The ride into town gave Caleb time to think, time to process everything that had happened in the past 5 days. His life had been turned completely inside out, the future he'd imagined replaced with something he couldn't yet name. But strangely, impossibly, he found himself grateful for it. The grief was real, the loss undeniable, but so was the connection he was forming with Anna. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but something equally valuable. Understanding, companionship. The sense that he wasn't alone in his struggle to make sense of a world that so often made no sense at all. In Cedar Bluff, Caleb went about his business quickly, buying flour and sugar, coffee and salt, a few other necessities. He was loading his purchases onto his horse when he heard a familiar voice. Caleb Danner, been wondering when I'd see you in town. He turned to find Reverend Thomas approaching, the same man who had initially suggested Margaret as a correspondent. The Reverend was in his 60s, with kind eyes and a manner that invited confidence. Caleb had always liked him, appreciated his lack of judgment, his genuine interest in people's well-being. Reverend, Caleb said, nodding in greeting. Heard the stage came in last week, Reverend Thomas said, his eyes searching Caleb's face. Heard you were there to meet it. How did it go? Did Miss Hale arrive safely? Caleb's throat tightened. Here it was, the first test of how he would explain what had happened. He could lie, could say everything was fine, could avoid the whole messy truth. But something in him rebelled against that. Margaret had died because of lies, however well-intentioned. He wouldn't dishonor her memory by building new ones. Miss Hale didn't arrive, he said quietly. She passed away last spring. Pneumonia. The Reverend's face fell, genuine sorrow etching deep lines around his eyes. Oh, Caleb, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. She never mentioned being ill in her letters to me. She didn't want people to know, Caleb said. Didn't want pity or fuss. She just wanted to live her last months with some measure of dignity and hope. And the woman who came on the stage? The Reverend asked gently. Pete Carson mentioned someone did arrive. Her sister Anna, Caleb said. She came to deliver Margaret's final letter, to tell me the truth. Reverend Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing this. That must have been devastating, he said finally, to expect one thing and receive another, to have hope and then have it taken away. It was, Caleb admitted. Still is in some ways, but Anna, she's hurting too. She's been carrying this burden for months, keeping her sister's secret, writing those letters in Margaret's hand because Margaret asked her to. She came here not just to deliver truth, but to keep a promise to a dying woman. That takes courage. It does, the Reverend agreed. And she's still with you? At your ranch? Caleb nodded, aware of how it might look, aware of the gossip it could generate in a town as small as Cedar Bluff. She's staying for a while. She has nowhere else to go, and I have space. It seemed like the right thing to do. Reverend Thomas studied Caleb's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The right thing often is the hard thing, he said, and from what I can see, you're both walking a difficult path. If you need anything, spiritual guidance, practical help, or just someone to talk to, my door is always open. Thank you, Reverend, Caleb said, surprised by the relief he felt at the man's understanding. One more thing, the Reverend added. Don't let the tongues wag. People will talk, because that's what people do. But you and Anna know the truth of your situation, and that's what matters. Don't let others' ignorance or assumptions dictate how you live your life. Caleb felt gratitude wash over him. I appreciate that, more than you know. He rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent, his saddlebags full of supplies, and his mind full of thoughts. The Reverend's words had given him something he hadn't realized he needed. Permission, perhaps. Permission to forge his own path, to make his own choices, to trust his own judgment about what was right for himself and for Anna. When he arrived home, he found Anna on the porch, the journal open in her lap. She looked up as he dismounted, and he could see she'd been drawing again. Her fingers were smudged with graphite, and there was a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. How was town? She asked as he climbed the steps. Uneventful, mostly, Caleb said. He hesitated, then added, I saw Reverend Thomas. Told him about Margaret, about you. Anna's expression grew cautious. What did he say? That we're both walking a difficult path. That people will talk, but we shouldn't let it dictate how we live. Caleb sat down in the rocking chair, suddenly tired. He was kind, understanding. That's good, Anna said softly. I've been worried about that. About what people would think, what they'd say. About whether my being here would damage your reputation. I don't much care about my reputation, Caleb said honestly. Never have. I care about doing what feels right, what feels honest. And you being here feels right. Anna's eyes shimmered with emotion. It feels right to me too, she admitted. These past few days, I felt more like myself than I have in months, maybe years. I wake up in the morning and there's this moment of peace before the grief rushes in. And even when it does rush in, it doesn't drown me the way it used to, because I'm not facing it alone anymore. Neither am I, Caleb said. They sat together as the evening deepened, Anna showing Caleb what she'd been drawing, a series of sketches capturing different moments from the past few days. The creek in the rain, Bessie in the pasture, the cabin at sunset, and one that made Caleb's breath catch, a drawing of hands, two sets of hands, not quite touching, separated by a small gap of white paper. What's this one? He asked, though he thought he knew. Us, Anna said simply. Where we are right now, close but not quite touching, connected but separate, healing side by side but on our own paths. She traced the gap between the hands with her finger. I don't know if that gap will ever close. Don't know if it should. But I wanted to capture this moment, this in-between place where we're both learning to be okay with not knowing. Caleb stared at the drawing, moved by its honesty. "Can I keep this?" he asked. Anna looked surprised. "Really? You'd want it?" "I would," Caleb said. "It captures something true, something important. I'd like to remember this. Remember that healing doesn't always look like we think it should. That sometimes it looks like two people sitting on a porch, grieving different versions of the same loss, learning to be less lonely together." Anna carefully tore the page from the journal and handed it to him. "Then it's yours," she said. "A gift, or maybe a reminder that we're both exactly where we need to be, even when it doesn't feel like it." That night, after dinner, they sat by the fire and Anna asked Caleb to tell her more about the war. Not the battles or the violence, but the moments in between, the friendships forged, the small kindnesses shared, the ways men found to hold on to their humanity in the midst of inhumanity. Caleb found himself talking about things he'd never spoken aloud. About a young soldier named David who used to sing hymns before every battle, his voice clear and true. About a grizzled sergeant who kept a pressed flower from his wife in his pocket and would take it out to look at when things got particularly bad. About the night after a terrible battle, when the survivors had sat around a fire, not speaking, just being together in their shared trauma and relief at having lived through another day. "That's what this feels like sometimes," Caleb said. "You and me here, like we're survivors of different battles, sitting around a fire, not needing to speak because we understand what the other has lived through." Anna nodded slowly. Margaret used to talk about that, about how the deepest connections happen when we can sit in silence with someone and not feel the need to fill it, when we can just be, without explanation or performance. "I'm learning that with you," Caleb said. "Learning that silence isn't loneliness, that presence is its own kind of conversation." "I'm learning it too," Anna said, "and it's a gift, a strange, unexpected gift, but a gift nonetheless." The fire crackled and popped, and outside the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves. It would be a cold night, Caleb thought. But here, in this room with the fire burning and Anna across from him, he felt warm, protected, less alone than he'd been in years. "Caleb?" Anna said, her voice tentative. "Yes?" "What happens when the week is over? Tomorrow, I mean. You said I could stay for a week, and tomorrow makes 7 days. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear there, the worry that he might send her away now that the time was up, that whatever grace period he'd granted was coming to an end. And he realized with sudden clarity that sending her away was the last thing he wanted. "The week was arbitrary," he said. "A starting point, nothing more. You stay as long as you need to stay, Anna. As long as you want to stay. This place is big enough for two people learning to heal, big enough for two people figuring out who they are and what they want from life." Anna's relief was visible, her shoulders dropping, her breath releasing in a long exhale. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "Don't want to take advantage of your kindness." "You're not a burden," Caleb said firmly. "You're company. You're help with the work. You're someone who understands what I'm going through because you're going through something similar. That's not a burden. That's a blessing." Tears slipped down Anna's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me, for letting me stay, for giving me a place to figure out who Anna Hale is when she's not defined by loss." "Thank you for being brave enough to come here," Caleb replied. "For keeping your promise to Margaret, for showing me that grief doesn't have to be a solitary journey." They sat in silence for a while longer, both lost in thought. Then Anna stood and moved to the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "It's beautiful here," she said. "Margaret was right about that. The way you described it in your letters, it was all true. The sunsets, the stars, the sense of endless space. It's like the land is big enough to hold all our pain and still have room for beauty." Caleb joined her at the window, standing close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. "That's why I came here," he said. "After the war, I needed space. Needed emptiness I could fill with something other than memories of death and destruction. I needed a place where I could build instead of destroy, where I could nurture instead of kill." "And did it work?" Anna asked. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I found peace," Caleb said, "or something close to it. Found a way to live with what I'd seen and done. Found a way to make each day mean something, even if it was just feeding animals and mending fences and watching the sun rise and set. He paused. But I was still alone, still missing something I couldn't quite name. Connection, Anna said softly. That's what you were missing, what we were both missing. Yes, Caleb agreed. Connection. The sense that someone else sees the world the way you do, feels what you feel, understands without needing endless explanations. Anna turned to face him, and in the dim light from the fire, her face was beautiful, not in a way that competed with Margaret, but in its own right. Beautiful in its honesty, in the vulnerability she was learning to show, in the strength it took to stand here and admit her needs and fears. I think Margaret knew, Anna said. I think she knew that bringing us together would give us both something we desperately needed. Maybe that's the real gift she left us. Not a romance, not a replacement for what we'd lost, but a chance at real connection, at understanding, at being less alone. I think you're right, Caleb said, and I think she'd be happy knowing we found it. That we found each other, even if it wasn't in the way any of us expected. They stood there together, looking out at the vast Texas sky, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't love. Not the romantic kind, anyway. It was something deeper, something more fundamental. It was recognition. The sense that Anna was someone who could walk beside him through life. Not because they were bound by passion or romance, but because they were bound by understanding, by shared experience, by the knowledge that they were both trying to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Come on, Caleb said eventually. It's late. We should get some rest. Anna nodded and moved toward her room, but at the door she paused and looked back at him. Caleb, I want you to know something. These past few days, they've been hard, painful, but they've also been healing. You've given me something I didn't know I could have again. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope I had when Margaret was dying, but real hope. The kind that's grounded in present reality rather than desperate wishes for the future. You've given me the same thing, Caleb said honestly. You've reminded me that I can still connect with people, still care about someone without it destroying me. That's not a small thing. Anna smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Anna. She disappeared into her room, and Caleb stood in the main room for a moment, feeling the weight of the week settling over him. 7 days. That's all it had been since Anna had stepped off that coach and shattered his world with 6 words. 7 days of grief and revelation, of pain and unexpected grace, of learning to live in a reality that bore no resemblance to the one he'd imagined. But standing here now, with Anna sleeping in the next room and the stars wheeling overhead and the land stretching endlessly in all directions, Caleb realized something profound. This reality, unexpected, unplanned, born from loss and delivered through sorrow, was better than the dream he'd been living in, because it was real, because it was honest, because it required him to show up as himself, flaws and all, and to accept Anna as herself, flaws and all. He walked to the table and picked up the drawing Anna had given him, the 2 sets of hands, close but not touching. He studied it in the firelight, tracing the gap between the hands, the space that held both separation and connection. That gap was important, he realized. It represented their individual journeys, their separate paths to healing. But it also represented the possibility that someday, if they both did the work, if they both learned to be whole on their own, those hands might close the distance. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe the gap would remain, and they would be companions on parallel paths, close but never quite touching, and that would be all right too. Because the value wasn't in the touching, it was in the closeness itself, in the presence, in the understanding that came from walking similar roads, even if those roads never quite merged into one. Caleb carefully folded the drawing and placed it in the drawer with Margaret's letter. 2 pieces of paper, 2 different messages, but both equally precious. Margaret's letter had given him permission to move forward, to stay open, to keep living. Anna's drawing had given him permission to take his time, to honor the space between them, to trust that healing was a process that couldn't be rushed. Together, they formed a kind of map, not of where he was going, but of where he was. And for now, that was enough. He banked the fire and made his way to his room. And as he lay in bed, he listened to the sounds of the night, the creak of the cabin, the whisper of wind, and underneath it all, barely audible, the sound of Anna breathing in the next room, the sound of another human being sharing his space, his life, his journey. It was a good sound, a healing sound, a sound that spoke of possibility and presence and the slow, patient work of becoming whole again. As sleep finally claimed him, Caleb's last thought was of Margaret, not with grief this time, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the letters that had opened his heart, gratitude for her final gift, delivered through her sister's courage, gratitude for the strange, winding path that had brought him here, to this moment, to this unexpected life that was somehow exactly what he needed. And somewhere beyond the stars, beyond reach but not beyond memory, he imagined Margaret smiling, imagined her at peace, knowing that the seed she'd planted had taken root, that her words hadn't died with her, but had grown into something new, something neither she nor Caleb could have predicted, but both would have recognized as love. Not romantic love, perhaps, but something equally powerful. The love of two people choosing to witness each other's pain and joy, choosing to walk together through the wilderness of grief toward whatever lay on the other side. The night deepened, and in the cabin on the Texas plains, two hearts beat in separate rooms, separate but no longer alone. And that, in the end, was everything. That was the miracle neither had been looking for, but both had found. That was the gift that loss had somehow, impossibly delivered. And as morning approached, as the first hint of gray light began to touch the eastern horizon, the world held its breath. Because something had shifted, something had changed. Two people who had come together through death were learning to live again, and that small, quiet triumph mattered. It mattered more than all the words and all the letters ever written. It mattered more than dreams or plans or imagined futures. It mattered because it was